Today, we're back with Unintended Consequences, episode 71 for July 27th, 2026. Starting the week with a case study you'll be thinking about for days. In 1952, the Lorillard Tobacco Company introduced the Kent cigarette with its new Micronite filter. The company advertised the filter as a barrier that removed a significant portion of the smoke's irritants, presenting it as a clear mechanical improvement that would make the experience safer without requiring any other change to the cigarette itself. Smokers who switched to filtered brands soon found themselves finishing cigarettes faster and drawing the smoke farther into their lungs. The filter had been presented as protection. What it delivered was a behavioral shift that largely erased the intended benefit, because the very feature meant to reduce exposure instead encouraged people to take in more of what remained. By the early 1950s, two major epidemiological studies had linked cigarette smoking to lung cancer. The 1950 paper by Ernst Winder and Everts Graham appeared in the United States, and the 1952 report by Richard Dahl and A. Bradford Hill came from Britain. Public anxiety rose quickly once those findings circulated, and per capita consumption began to dip in several markets as people reconsidered their habits. Tobacco companies faced the first sustained threat to their product in decades. They turned to an existing technology of porous plugs of cellulose acetate or cotton that had already been tested in limited fashion. Engineers and marketing teams reasoned that a visible filter would give smokers a tangible sign that something harmful was being removed, restoring confidence at the point of purchase. The approach aligned with the era's broader faith in engineering solutions to industrial health problems. The idea that a device placed between the tobacco and the mouth could manage risk while leaving the underlying product untouched. Engineers understood that cellulose acetate filaments could be crimped and bundled into a plug roughly 20 millimeters long. The plug created a maze of tiny air channels that would trap some larger smoke particles through the physical processes of impaction and diffusion, while also cooling the smoke enough to produce a milder sensation on the throat. Internal memos from the period show product development teams calculating expected tar reductions on smoking machines that puffed at fixed volumes and intervals. The decision rested on the assumption that the physical barrier would operate independently of the person holding the cigarette. One might ask whether the milder draw would change how people used the product, yet the testing protocols at the time did not model that possibility, because the machines could not adjust their own behavior the way a living smoker could. Filtered cigarettes moved from niche to majority product within roughly 8 years. In 1952, fewer than 10% of American cigarettes carried filters. By 1960, the share exceeded 50%, and by 1970, it reached 80%. Kent's Micronite filter, Viceroy's Century Tip, and Winston's Pure White filter were promoted in print and television campaigns that used phrases such as significantly less tar and nicotine. The Federal Trade Commission briefly required tar and nicotine disclosures in 1957, then suspended the rule after industry complaints. Manufacturers scaled production by installing high-speed filter-making machines that extruded and cut cellulose acetate tow at rates of thousands of plugs per minute. When the FTC reinstated limited disclosure rules in the mid-1960s, companies introduced ventilation holes near the filter's mouth end to dilute the smoke stream during machine testing, allowing advertised numbers to drop further while the tobacco blend stayed essentially the same. Smokers compensated. When the filter reduced the nicotine concentration per puff, many unconsciously increased puff volume, frequency, or the number of cigarettes consumed each day. Internal documents later released in litigation show that Philip Morris researchers documented this compensation as early as 1961, noting that smokers of filtered brands smoked more intensively. Some designs incorporated ventilation holes near the filter tip. When fingers or lips covered the holes during normal use, the measured tar numbers became meaningless. A 1974 internal memo from British American Tobacco observed that the smoker is obtaining a higher delivery than the figures suggest. By the late 1970s, lung cancer rates among continuing smokers had not fallen in proportion to the advertised reductions. The cellulose acetate filter proved nearly non-biodegradable. Estimates from coastal cleanup organizations indicate that cigarette butts now constitute the single most numerous item collected in shoreline surveys, with trillions discarded worldwide since the 1960s. The compensation effect operated through straightforward nicotine titration. If a filter removed roughly 30% of the nicotine that would otherwise reach the smoker, a person accustomed to a certain blood nicotine level could restore that level by taking one additional puff per cigarette or by smoking one extra cigarette per pack. Over months, these small adjustments compounded so that a smoker who had consumed 20 cigarettes daily might end up taking in the same or greater total nicotine while still believing the lower machine numbers applied to their own habit. Ventilation holes introduced a further mismatch. When blocked, the dilution intended to lower tar readings disappeared, yet the smoker still experienced the milder draw that encouraged deeper inhalation. On the litter side, each discarded filter represented a bundle of crimped cellulose acetate fibers bound with a plasticizer that resisted breakdown in sunlight or seawater. Because billions of filtered cigarettes were sold annually, even a low per-cigarette loss rate translated into billions of persistent plastic fragments entering waterways each year. The 1981 Surgeon General's report on the changing cigarette acknowledged that compensation had largely offset the expected risk reduction. Subsequent litigation forced the release of internal studies showing companies had understood the limits of filtration for decades. Filter ventilation remains common in light and ultralight brands, though those descriptors are now restricted in many jurisdictions. No major manufacturer has abandoned the cellulose acetate filter. The litter problem has prompted deposit schemes and extended producer responsibility proposals in several countries, yet the core product design persists. When a safety device alters the user's behavior, the net effect can erase or even reverse the intended gain. Compensation is not an edge case, but a predictable response once the user notices the change. Reassuring signals such as visible filters and numerical ratings can crowd out more direct warnings because they allow continued use under the impression of reduced risk. Modern nicotine delivery systems still confront the same tension between measured emissions and actual human puffing patterns. The durable question is whether any new safety feature will be evaluated not only in the laboratory, but also under the real conditions of use that people will adopt once the feature exists. That's unintended consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. Find every show free at neranetwork.com. The age of AI puts real builders on the phone with an AI host. Apply at neranetwork.com/age-of-AI apply. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.